Greetings, welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since I've released a video. I came down with COVID. I had my test done last Monday, the test came back on Tuesday, positive. Well, I've gotten off quite lightly. I just had chronic fatigue, some body aches and pains, headache, that sort of thing. So no coughing or temperature or like throwing up and so on. Some people have had some really nasty experiences, and I guess I am one of the lucky few that got off quite lightly. Alright, so I've almost completely recovered from COVID, which is good. Now let's get on with the video. Today's video, I've had some time to think about this, and today's video is it is on a subject that really bothers me. I'm sure it bothers a lot of cigar smokers. With the anti-tobacco movement and legislation that's in place, these horrible warning labels that we have on our cigar products that don't really have much to do with any dangers associated with cigar smoking. So I thought I would do a video where we go back in history and we have a look at how things progressed and where everything started to go wrong. And you probably guessed it by now, it was the rise of the cigarette. That is where everything went horribly wrong. So let's have a look. History of tobacco. So southern Patagonia, 7,000 years ago. We'll start there. Archaeological evidence of stone pipes. So they did a bit of tobacco smoking back there. And then of course you had old Christopher Columbus sailing across the sea, looking for China. Instead he found Cuba, and they noticed the locals there smoking their very rustic kind of just bundles of tobacco leaves wrapped up in a palm leaf or a maize leaf. So that was basically the first form of cigar smoking ever. So from there it went to Europe. I just wrote down a very quick little timeline here. So late 1600s introduced the Old World, and it's interesting to note that sugar and coffee spread around Europe at the same time. Slowly, it was a slow spread. Sugar, coffee, tobacco, they're all three stimulants, which is quite interesting. If you have a look at the timeline of when the Industrial Revolution started happening, and there was two of them, it kind of coincides with sugar and coffee and tobacco really sort of becoming ingrained in society in the Old World, so Europe, and parts of Asia and so on. And it kind of makes sense as technology develops. You have sort of steam power and all that sort of stuff. Industrial Revolution, people are staying up later, drinking their coffee, thinking up ideas. It just kind of all comes together around about then. 1676, cigars born in Sevilla in Spain, and 1700 cigar factories sprout up all across Europe. 1817, King Ferdinand VII, by royal decree, made the production and sale of tobacco a legal endeavor in Cuba. So that's the birth of the Cuban cigar industry. So the Spanish got in there quite quickly. 1850s, cigar bans to distinguish different makers. 1920s, cigar rolling machine. Okay, none of this is really important. Let's just backtrack. Let's backtrack a bit to John Rolfe. Alright, he obtained some seeds. This was in Jamestown. You got some seeds, Nicotiana tabacum. Now this is the strain of tobacco that was going in Cuba, that native Indians had cultivated there. So it's really a cultivated type of tobacco. You had in North America, you had the rustica, you had some other wild tobaccos as well, and there is archaeological evidence. All the old stuff from like 7,000 years ago, it was those kinds, those old rustic kind of quite strong tobaccos. So the Native Americans, what they smoked in their peace pipes and so on, that would be the rustica. So now the Indians in the Caribbean had cultivated this tobacco for quite some time now. They actually showed the Spanish how they fermented them in their piles, their pilones, their piles of tobacco leaves. So they had a good thing going. They had it all sussed out. They had little seedlings. They transplanted them. They kept them covered, and then they harvested it. So the whole process was there. The Spanish The Spanish just came in and they started up factories and they perfected it. And over the next couple of 100 years, the Spanish perfected the cigar the way we know it today. We have your blend of fillers in the middle, you have some binder leaves to hold it all together, and then you have the best leaf of all, the best looking leaf as the wrapper that goes on the outside. You have one finished product that's all made of pure tobacco leaves. So there was no need to contain the leaves in a different leaf from a different plant, like a palm leaf or a banana leaf or what have you. It also made it easier to store them and to transport them, obviously. So, Spanish, very clever. Okay, John Rolfe, back to John Rolfe. So he obtained some of these seeds, nicotine tobacco, 1607. All right, and they started planting these in North America. Now, the tobacco, it takes a while, it takes a few seasons for the tobacco to establish itself in a new area. And the tobacco that started coming from these parts in America, it was equally as dark and sweet, yet milder and more delicate than Spanish-grown leaves. Okay, so they started exporting these leaves to Europe, and the English loved them, Europe loved them. Virginia tobacco became the European standard. So this was within a couple of decades. This is still in the 1600s, okay? That's my other timeline. Late 1600s introduced to the old world. Yes. Well, not sure about those dates exactly. That's what I've obtained from various sites on the internet. But there's no doubt about it. Virginia tobacco became the European standard eventually. So let's say by the late 1600s, people were smoking in Europe, and they had cigars from the Spanish. Although I've read somewhere else that the Spanish actually held onto the cigars and it wasn't really widely released to the rest of Europe. So maybe that is why the tobacco from America became so prominent in Europe. The Spanish were kind of doing their thing, perfecting the cigar, and which is why pipe smoking was actually, I think it was more in vogue. Well, there was also some snuff, but from what I can make out, looking at the history, some sites at different dates, but more or less, I think it's more or less there. So the tobacco we're dealing with now is still dark leaf, it's dark and sweet, but it's still very much cigar territory. Okay, there's no sign of cigarettes yet. But what's interesting is this tobacco planted by John Rolfe and other people, and it kind of spread and so on, it moved more inland, it moved west, okay? Tobacco is quite heavy on nutrients, and back in those days they didn't know anything about crop rotation or soil science or how to improve soil, so they'd simply plant their crops, and as soon as the tobacco yield went down, they would leave it and they'd move to a new place, and they'd move further west, so they'd go according to where the fertile soil was. And this carried on for about 200 years, and now you can imagine 200 years of pushing it really. You're planting in fairly rich soil, which then gets depleted, and then you move on. And I think the plant, the DNA would start retaining this information, the plant would start adapting. And of course, when they got as far as North Carolina, and that's bordering on Virginia, the soil there was actually a lot sandier and not so fertile. And the tobacco still managed to thrive there. And this is kind of one of those ingredients for the recipe that was to come. So they're growing all this leaf there, it's doing well, and making lots of money, and then this accident happens. A slave by the name of Stephen, he was a blacksmith, and this is on the farm of Abish Slade. He was a tobacco planter, and the slave Stephen, he was his job was to oversee, well, he was also a blacksmith on a farm, but he also oversaw the curing process of the tobacco crop. So, one evening we are told that he fell asleep during the process due to the warmth of the fire, okay? And he woke up to find the fire almost out, so he added some coals and some logs from his forge fire, alright? Because he was terrified that if the fire went out, the master would be very angry, so quickly got the fire up, and the sudden intense heat led to the tobacco being cured with a very bright, vivid yellow finish. And I guess old Abish said, "What the hell is this?" Examining this leaf. And yeah, they tried it, and it was actually very pleasant to them. And this actually took off. This new process of flue curing the tobacco took off, and it became a massive thing. Just in a, I think it's the next couple of decades, it really established itself. People were smoking this left, right, and center. And I think in those days, anything new and shiny, it drew the attention of everyone around it. And you can imagine for farmers in the area, if you are sitting with land that is relatively not so fertile, but you have tobacco, which is a fabulous cash crop, and it thrives on this poor soil, then obviously you're going to plant as much of it as possible. You're going to make as much money. I mean, that's your opportunity, you know, that's any farmer's opportunity. Any farmer who spots an opportunity will obviously maximize it. And so it was found that the sandy, relatively infertile soil of many North Carolina farms was ideal for growing tobacco for such a curing process. And it was specifically, I think, because the plant had been pushed to the limits and it was forced to adapt. As the soil became increasingly infertile, the plant, made its move and the leaves became milder and so on. But with this new curing process, the smoke was milder, but more importantly, it was acidic. So that means acidic smoke can now be drawn into the lungs, and these people spotted that pretty quickly. Like with cigar and with this tobacco that has been in existence up till then, the tobacco has been very alkaline in nature, and it's very uncomfortable to draw alkaline smoke into your lungs, so it's generally not done. So now with this new type of tobacco, it was easy to draw into your lungs with a bit of practice. And of course that meant that the nicotine got into your bloodstream a lot quicker, because the surface area of the lungs are huge compared to the lining of your mouth. So nicotine gets into your blood very quickly, and within seconds it's pumped up the receptors in the brain, and you experience this nicotine head rush. And these guys experienced this head rush, and it was unlike anything they'd ever experienced before. So naturally this tobacco took off in a big way. Now, Europe has already been primed. They're getting most of their tobacco from North America, and they are loving it. So now when this new type of tobacco came across, they were ready to receive it, and it took off even further. I mean, it was an instant hit. People absolutely loved it. And at this stage, cigarettes were starting to appear as well. There was a Crimean War, and some of the English soldiers noticed that the Turks smoked little cigarettes. It's probably made from the oriental tobaccos that they had on that side. But it wasn't the cigarette that we know today. But now that you have this new flue-cure tobacco coming across the sea to Europe, now more and more people are trying out producing it in small quantities and rolling it into cigarette form, because it was more convenient. Convenience is key. We are creatures of convenience, so if something comes along that's more convenient, you'll obviously give it a go. Alright, so we're in the 1800s now. You've got a pretty healthy cigar industry going. Most people, fair amount of people were smoking cigars, but cigarettes were gaining in popularity, definitely gaining in a big way. And then you had people basically hand rolling, at warehouses full of people hand rolling cigarettes as part of the cigarette industry, alongside, well, not alongside, but then you also had the cigars doing their things, and the cigars typically haven't changed much. But yeah, cigarettes were on the rise, and then you had this guy by the name of James Bonsack, who came up with a rolling machine. So the automated roller. This is in 1881. So he came up with this, and that's it. I mean, pretty much overnight, those warehouses full of people hand rolling cigarettes vanished. You had a machine that could do 200 cigarettes per minute. Well, it still took a while, but now because of this hand rolling machine, big tobacco was born. So this guy, it doesn't matter what his name is, he bought the patent for these machines and they started big factories, and pretty soon they were churning out so many cigarettes. And of course, as many as they could churn out, the demand was even greater. So as quick as they could get rid of the cigarettes, people wanted more. They, big business, lots of money. It was inevitable. So over the next 2 decades, 80% of all tobacco products in the US, that's cigarettes, plug tobacco, smoking tobacco, which I imagine is for pipes, and snuff. And cigars are not mentioned. I think the cigar manufacturing must have declined massively in America, and you just had Cuba and the Spanish carrying on most of the... I'm sure they carried on in some forms, in some places, but the majority of tobacco production was now this flue-cured stuff, which was taking the world by storm. But cigarettes were seen as a good thing. Any form of tobacco was seen as a good thing, but what they did not realize back then is that because this new tobacco was acidic, it could be drawn into the lungs, the speed at which the nicotine got absorbed and the speed at which it reached the receptors in the brain formed this dependency cycle. So, a quick head rush is fun, I guess, but it means that your body wants it more and more and more. So these people were becoming addicted. So large tobacco companies were now taking this cigarette and pushing it to new highs. They were adding chemicals to it to stabilize it, to homogenize the whole process. The chemicals they added gave it a better shelf life, and if you compare cigarettes, this is now, let's say it's 1920, you've got cigars on the one hand, you've got cigarettes on the other. You've got the second industrial revolution in full swing, so people's lifestyles have changed. Especially if you're living in a big town or in cities, you tend to be a factory worker, you're working in shifts. So if you were a cigar smoker, you might be tempted by this new cigarette, which is just so much more convenient. And people made the switch quite happily. They were smoking for the first time. You can draw the smoke into your lungs and get this nicotine rush. Nobody knew about addiction back then or what it meant. They just carried on. It was all good fun. And you could now go through your shift, your work shift, and every now and then you could stop and have a quick cigarette. So it's 6 minutes of smoking and then you're back on the job, which was easier and more convenient than a cigar. So you can see from their point of view, factory workers doing your shifts day in, day out. It's a more fast-paced way of life now. Things are becoming mechanized. You've got assembly lines, and cigarettes just keep you going. You sort of stop every now and then for a quick ciggy break, and then on you go. So also the fact is you can keep a pack of cigarettes very easily in your pocket. A pack of cigars is not so easy to keep in the pocket, and cigars need to be humidified. Also back then they struggled with humidification issues, which is where the detestable habit of licking the cigar came into being, just to give it a little bit of moisture before you light it up. Thank goodness we don't have to do that anymore. So anyway, cigarettes became huge. They became massive. And in the 20s, 30s, you have Hollywood becoming big as well. Think of the movies made in the golden age of Hollywood. And cigarettes just go hand in hand. It became a star of the show, of the silver screen in a way. People would smoke with a flourish. Everybody wanted to be those stars puffing away. The cigarette was a handy prop, I guess. And it was obviously, the height of gentlemanly manners to light a lady's cigarette for her. Very gentlemanly indeed. Okay, so this pandemic of cigarette smoking just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't think people gave much thought to the environmental impact, and especially because it was so easily aimed at the lower classes, the people with less education and less money. Think of England, where you have all these houses attached to each other. everybody's smoking, all generations, even teenagers would probably start as soon as possible, because teenagers back in those days would find work at a young age, and in factories and so on. So you have multiple generations in one household smoking, so the whole house would obviously reek of smoke, and you'd have this environmental kind of contamination all around you. So it's no surprise that 40s, 50s, 60s, you'd eventually get a backlash. You'd eventually get the health community and the people who were against any form of tobacco anyway from the beginning, you'd get them going on about it. And yes, links to cancer, all those things were found. And so they started to put pressure on these companies to get legislation in place just to cut down on this massive global pandemic. I keep saying pandemic, and we're sitting in a pandemic with COVID, but I mean, cigarette smoking, it just became so big, it's everywhere. And that's what really irritated me when I finally got into smoking cigars. I'm a non-smoker otherwise. They call them never cigarette smokers. So I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't ever intend to. I don't see the point. I gave it a go, sort of around high school. I was cool for about 5 minutes, and then, that's the thing. That's how teenagers start smoking these days. It's not just peer pressure, but it is. But it's kind of that rebellious streak that most of us have. And if you have a group of kids who want to be cool, they're the ones that sit behind the gymnasium and they all puff on a cigarette in an effort to look cool. And it doesn't take a lot of practice pulling that smoke into your lungs, and you're hooked. And many smokers today, you can trace them back to their teenage years where they started. And once you're hooked, you're hooked. So I'll just quickly mention the cigar. So the cigar rolling machine, interesting enough, it came up in the 1920s. Now obviously the cigar industry, the small industry that was in America and the larger industry that was in the Caribbean with Cuba and so on, they all saw this tidal wave of cigarette smoking taking the world by storm, and they were trying to compete. It's very hard to compete in a market that is saturated with a product. So the cigar rolling machine came out, and it was hoped that they could speed up the production of cigars just to try and compete. So you had these machine-made cigars with short filler now making an appearance. And it did, it boosted their sales a little bit. But yeah, the two are such very, very different things. Cigarettes on the one hand, cigars on the other. Very, very different. So in 1959, you had Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution, and you had this massive exodus out of Cuba. The cigar makers just up and left. Because Fidel, old Castro, he just took all their stuff. It's like, I'll have your factory, it's all mine, mine, mine. So these people grabbed their seeds and they left. And they spread to America. Some went to the Dominican Republic. They even mentioned the Canary Islands, but I don't know if tobacco is actually, I don't think it's cultivated there, but maybe they probably have a factory or two there where they roll the stuff. They just get the leaves in and roll it. Central America, which is Honduras and Nicaragua has been labeled as, the second coming of Cuba, because the soil there is just as rich and the conditions there are very excellent for Cuban style cigar tobacco. Okay, so this brain drain initiates a new era of great cigar making outside of Cuba. Lung cancer was once a very rare disease, so it's not even recognized medically until the 18th century, and as recently as 1900, only 140 cases were known in the published medical literature. So 1900 lung cancer, and it makes sense. Tobacco smoke was never drawn into the lungs until the Flue-cure Tobacco came along. And so with the Flue-cure Tobacco, you now have these health risks. Okay, so let me try and explain a little bit more about what's in a cigarette. So you have your cigarette, okay? Your little, I don't actually have one here. And inside you have some tobacco. And I think what I forgot to mention earlier, but which you probably all know, is that the main Flue-cure tobacco, the one that did exceptionally well, was then called Virginia tobacco. And so Golden Virginia, which is grown all over the globe, that is the best of the best as far as Flue-cured is concerned. So obviously in your cigarette you'll find Golden Virginia tobacco. Interestingly enough, the modern cigarette only contains about 50% actual tobacco. 50%, so half of your cigarette isn't even real tobacco. Half of it is, half of it isn't. So what they do in cigar factories is they have these enormous vats and they put in floor sweepings and offcuts, bits and pieces, stock that's been returned, that's been damaged, and whatever they chuck it all in this vat, add water, boil it up, and you end up with this brown liquid mixture. Okay, and they add chemicals to it. They can tweak the formula until it suits the factory process. And then they have a very fine paper that's on a giant roller, and they roll this bit of paper out, and they have these little, almost like inkjet thingies that spray that liquid onto the paper. Alright, so spray it onto the paper becomes brown, it rolls along, eventually it dries out on this conveyor belt, and then they feed this brown paper into a shredder machine, and it shreds it up nice and fine to look like tobacco. And this you call expanded tobacco. It is absolutely not tobacco, it's just a paper with a lot of tobacco juice sprayed onto it. And that's actually what makes up the rest of your cigarette. And then of course you've got 500 or more chemicals added to the cigarette. It helps with the burn, so it burns constantly and evenly. I don't know if you've noticed, if you smoke a cigarette and you put the cigarette down, it'll continue burning. It'll burn slower, but it will continue burning until it's finished. You can actually use it as a fuse for an explosive device. It is that regular in the fact that it just burns. And that's the stuff that they add to it. They also added some chemicals to make the nicotine absorption more quicker, more rapid. There's apparently chemicals in there that specifically make your blood vessels dilate. So the blood gets pumped around even more quicker, and the nicotine just makes its way to the brain even more quicker. So a cigarette is designed to be as addictive as possible. There is no way around it. It is addictive as can be. It is probably the most addictive thing on this planet. And that's the reason why we're sitting in this situation that we are. This backlash against tobacco is huge. I mean, we are sitting in a major situation here. And what bothers me massively, and what bothers many cigar smokers, is that cigars should not be a part of this fight. Okay, you've got these people that, if you mention the word tobacco, they start frothing at the mouth. Tobacco is evil, etc. That's what they say. That's their motto, and it is so wrong. It is absolutely not true. Cigar tobacco has remained pretty much exactly the same as it was 400 years ago. It's just pure tobacco leaves, it's aged, it's fermented, nothing is added in the way of chemicals or anything, and the amazing flavors you get are also not added. It's just purely the fermentation process and the nature of the leaves that provide you with an amazing smoking experience. And sadly, cigarettes have come along and just ruined everything, basically. The media has taken these lies to new heights. They make it sound like if you sit on a park bench with someone who's smoking, just a whiff of a secondhand tobacco will give you cancer, which is absolute nonsense. Alright, let me try and condense my thoughts into something meaningful for you guys. And this video is obviously aimed at people who don't necessarily know about how things developed and got to the situation that we are in now. And many people, especially here in South Africa, they just don't know what a cigar is. They just assume it's just a large version of a cigarette, which is, it's comparing apples to oranges, or well, they're both fruit, apples to potatoes. They are such very, very different things. Okay, so I've even seen online on some forums someone was going on about how tobacco is evil, stay away from it. Cigarettes are evil. Cigars are evil, just don't do it. That is absolutely not true. The truth is, what large tobacco corporations have done with this Flue-cure tobacco, that is evil. They've gone and made a product that is so addictive, and then they've gone and aimed it at every level of society, from kids, teenagers and up. They've aimed it at them, and then they've bombarded us with adverts glamorizing the use of smoking. And I still remember these adverts from the 90s when I'd go to the movie theaters, we'd go watch a movie. The ads in the beginning, Peter Stuyvesant, you'd have people cruising around on jet skis and drinking cocktails and so on. It was the life. Or you have Mr. Camelman climbing up next to a waterfall and then sitting there in the sunset and firing up his cigarette, you know, be adventurous, be a camelman, kind of bullshit. So what the large tobacco corporations have done, then they're going to deny that there's anything that can affect your health with their product. Just in denial. But what they can't deny is that cigarettes are addictive. They are super duper duper addictive. And now you have these warning labels on all the products. Like tobacco is addictive. Well, it depends what type of tobacco. Because if I say no it's not, then Flue-cure is, you know, yes it is. If I say yes it is, what about cigars? Cigars are not addictive. Let me just go over that once more for you to make this absolutely clear. When you smoke a cigarette, you draw the smoke deeply into your lungs because the smoke is acidic. Alright, you have a massive surface area in your lungs. The smoke is absorbed very quickly into your bloodstream. It gets pumped up to your brain receptors very, very quickly. Within seconds, you experience a nicotine head rush. That forms the dependency cycle. Your body gets hooked. It needs more. You become a dependent. You become hooked. And that's it. You're an addict. Alright? Cigar smoker. You puff and swirl the alkaline smoke around your mouth. You can't inhale it into your lungs. You'd be an absolute moron if you tried, because alkaline smoke is incredibly uncomfortable to get into your lungs. So therefore, ergo, it is not done. It's just not meant to be done. End of story. The nicotine gets absorbed through your mouth lining, where it makes its way slowly to the brain. How slowly? Well, when I puff on a cigar, it can take between 5 and 10 minutes for me to actually feel the nicotine. That means zero dependency cycle is formed. I do not become addicted to nicotine, which means I can smoke a cigar every other day and never, ever, 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 ever get addicted to nicotine, ever. That is the difference between cigars and cigarettes. Now let me chuck this screenshot of this thing, and I'll definitely put the link in the description below. I'll put all the links of all these, wherever I found some info, I'll put the links down in the description below for those of you who want to have a look. Alright, so here we go. That's on the screen. Now it says there, the importance of dose and inhalation for lung cancer risk among cigar smokers are presented in figure 3, blah blah blah, there's some lung cancer risk data. When cigar smokers don't inhale or smoke few cigars per day, the risks are only slightly above those of never smokers. Alright? The risks are only slightly above those of never smokers. So the risks are pretty much zero. Now, risks of lung cancer increase with increasing inhalation and with increasing number of cigars smoked per day. Now, nobody in their right mind is going to inhale the damn smoke, so it shouldn't even happen. But the effect of inhalation is more powerful than that for numbers of cigars per day. So if you smoke, let me just continue, when 5 or more cigars are smoked per day and there's moderate inhalation, the lung cancer risks of cigar smoking approximate those of a 1 pack per day cigarette smoker. Now this blows that myth completely out of the water, where people have said, yes, but the amount of tobacco inside a cigar, one cigar, is equivalent to a pack of cigarettes. You are missing the point entirely, because the one type of tobacco is absolutely differently, very, very different in constituency, am I saying it right? Compared to the tobacco you find in a cigarette, half of which isn't even real, and it's laced full of chemicals. Alright? So here we go, 5 cigars per day. This is according to the study and all that stuff. So the effect of inhalation is more powerful than that. So it's not so much the number of cigars you smoke per day, but it's whether you inhale or not. So the thing is, if you do not inhale, then you're not going to have any problems with smoking cigars. They go on about mouth cancer, oral cancer, and so on and so forth. I'm sorry. Find somebody famous who you know has smoked cigars all their life long and see if they've had any mouth cancers or anything, and you'll find 0. You will find very few, maybe 1 or 2, but gosh, you have to smoke a shitload of cigars to try and, to get to that kind of state. Alright, so what you can get from this is that if you smoke 1 or 2 cigars a day, your risks will be slightly above 0. If you round it up or down, you end up with 0. So the risk is very small, very, very, very small. But just the fact that you smoke a pack of cigarettes a day and you inhale means you have health risks. Okay? So the health risks, all the stuff you find on the packaging and so on, it is purely for cigarettes in most cases. I'm sure you'll find the exception. You'll find some idiot who goes and smokes cigars and draws into his lungs and smokes 4 or 5 a day. Yes, if he ends up with lung cancer, I won't be surprised, but don't try and smear that on the rest of us cigar smokers, okay? The average cigar smoker smokes once in a while as a treat. And let's look at the habits. A cigarette smoker needs to top up their addiction, okay? They get withdrawal symptoms, and the withdrawal symptoms are quite horrible. So every hour or 2 hours, they need to smoke a cigarette in order to feel normal. And so by smoking cigarettes, they're not deriving any kind of extra pleasure out of what they're doing. They are merely furthering their addiction. All right, they are continuing along this path. And I did read about a study. If I have the gist of it, if you draw a kind of a happiness trend for a non-smoker. All right, so happiness trend, your overall satisfaction during your day, it's kind of a line that you can draw. Obviously, it'll be a bit of a wiggle up and down, but mainly a straight line, okay? Now, if you draw alongside that line, that of a smoker, it'll start off the same, but it'll immediately start dipping. Okay, as those withdrawal symptoms get a tighter hold on him, it plunges. His satisfaction goes down, he's becoming agitated, he's becoming unhappy, his mental state, his cognitive function is actually going down as well. And by about hour 2, it's plunging, and he smokes a cigarette, and this brings him back up to normal. Doesn't even bring him above normal to that of a non-smoker, brings him up to normal. Even the cognitive function of someone who's just smoked a cigarette with all its stimulating properties doesn't really improve your brain function that much compared to a normal non-smoking person, okay? And then within 15 minutes, that trend starts dipping again. Dipping, and again, by hour number 2, he's desperate for his cigarette, fires it up, brings him back up to normal. So a smoker will go through life like this with his addiction. A non-smoker is like, yeah, you know what? I feel like a cigar. Woohoo! Happiness goes up. Anyway, you can take what you want out of that. So, back to this screenshot. So the claim has been made that cigar smokers who smoke few cigars or do not inhale have no increased risk of disease. Okay, this is not a claim that has been made, but a more accurate statement would be that the risks experienced by cigar smokers are proportionate to their exposure to tobacco smoke. And I agree with that. It is wrong of me to say that there's absolutely no risk whatsoever. There is risk in absolutely everything we do. Crossing the street, you need to use your eyes and your ears to check that something isn't going to come barreling down and squash you. Okay, it makes sense to take precautions. Let's take bacon, for example. I like to eat bacon. A couple of rashers with breakfast is a very nice way to start the day. But what if I took that too far? What if I ate a kilogram of bacon every day? And I did this every single day for the rest of my life. Now obviously a little bit of bacon is absolutely fine to someone like me who tends to lead an active, fairly balanced life. I try and eat well. I try and work out every now and then. So a couple of rashers of bacon are not going to impact my life in any negative way that much. But a kilo every single day, a kilogram of bacon every single day. You can imagine all that salt, that saturated fat. That's all going to add up, and there's going to be problems. Trust me, your arteries are going to suffer. Your heart's going to feel it. Okay. So that's the same with smoking. And now the problem, and this is the crux of the matter, because cigarette smokers are addicted, they have no choice but to carry on smoking. So during an average day, they will smoke X amount of cigarettes. It's a given. It's a freaking given. Cigar smokers, they choose when to smoke. That's the big difference. They're not addicted to nicotine for the most part. I'm sure you'll get the odd exception here and there, but for the most part, a cigar smoker like myself, not addicted to nicotine, never will be. I choose when I want to smoke. Right now my humidor is empty, so I can't smoke at all anyway. But if I had a few sticks in my humidor, I would definitely consider smoking on the weekend, and then I'd give it a couple of days. The week tends to be quite busy. Maybe in the middle of the week, smoke one, and then... So it comes down to choice. I choose to smoke because I want to treat myself, and because it is lovely, and it's a good opportunity for me to sit back and reflect on my life, and maybe think or dwell on a problem that I'm dealing with, or whatever. Introspection, it's all good. It's good for you. And for a cigar, you have to carve an hour out of your busy schedule in order to enjoy that smoke. You see the difference? It's just, you cannot compare a cigar smoking experience to a cigarette. It's not fair to do so. And that is why I'm very annoyed with the situation we find ourselves in, with all this legislation and this anti-tobacco bullshit. It's aimed at cigarettes, but cigars are being caught in the crossfire. That is my pet peeve. That is what really grinds my gears, is that they label the same stuff for cigarettes and they just copy and paste it. Even if you look around online and you look at the dangers of cigar smoking, you'll get hit by the same old Surgeon General warnings and an absolute crock of shit. It does not apply to us cigar smokers, but they slap that label on there because it contains tobacco. That's as far as they go. So you have to really dig a little bit deeper to find something like this thing that I'm showing you here. But what this also shows is that you have to, well, whatever you do, you need to do it in a responsible manner. One thing that has been pointed out is that cigars, because they contain quite a lot of tobacco in one unit, and because they burn for an hour plus, you do end up with quite a lot of secondary smoke in the air. Now that is something that as cigar smokers, we need to take this into account in order to practice our hobby in a responsible manner, which is why you should always smoke in a well-ventilated area. If it's outdoors, on your veranda or balcony, or in a room that's dedicated for smoking, where you have these filters in place that actively remove the smoke from the air even while you're smoking. It's just the right thing to do, because there are risks, like that study has shown. Even if you don't smoke that many cigars a day, 2 or 3 seems to be perfectly safe. The risk remains though, and also it depends how you smoke them. So if you're sitting in a room that is completely sealed and you're sitting with all that secondhand cigar smoke, and then you're breathing that obviously into your lungs, your exposure is now going up, and the health risks associated with tobacco is now applicable to your situation. So it makes sense to take precautions to minimize those risks. So cigars, the dark leaf, that's the way to go. I mean, I wish things would change and cigarettes would just be wiped out completely, and that we won't have any cigarettes ever again. But how is it possible? Flue-cure tobacco is still being produced in massive quantities, and those evil tobacco companies, they simply aim it at developing countries. So where the legislation is not so heavy, teenagers get targeted or get hooked, and they just continue making ridiculous amounts of money. So I don't know. And as a cigarette smoker, if you're watching this and you're a cigarette smoker, feel free to comment. I don't mind. We can start a conversation by all means. But what options do cigarette smokers have? Because this legislation is hurting them too. I mean, they're addicted to this product. They are forced to feel guilty about their addiction and the fact that they are harming those around them with their secondhand smoke. I mean, they're made to feel terrible. And on top of that, they're being taxed. So to be a cigarette smoker is actually possibly one of the most unpleasant things to be these days, It's just awful. One way out that I can see is that you can start growing your own tobacco, and there are many, many places, many people that are doing this. And interestingly enough, what I have seen on some forums, I think it was on Fair Trade Tobacco, people who grow their own cigarette tobacco, they report that the tobacco tastes much better than the commercial stuff, all right? Because you're getting, let's face it, commercial cigarette manufacturers don't need the best quality tobacco for their product. The Golden Virginia they get that barely has to meet minimum standard. They add all the crap that they need in that cigarette later. So you just need a very bland, rubbishy kind of tobacco is good enough. I have no love for Golden Virginia. It's not something I would ever grow because it does not belong in a cigar. It doesn't belong anywhere near a cigar. So the people that are growing it themselves report better flavors, but they report less satisfaction on the nicotine front. And this is because the commercial tobacco contains that cocktail of ingredients that they put in there. And that cocktail of ingredients is not just for the shelf life, for the standard burning rate and so on, but it's that nicotine absorption enhancer. It kind of amplifies that effect, if you like. So when you're smoking homegrown stuff, you don't get that satisfaction that you would from a commercial cigarette. So basically you're addicted to the chemical cocktail that those big evil corporations have put into the cigarette tobacco. That's what you're actually addicted to, in a sense. I mean, tobacco also plays a part, but yeah. So the trick is to try and wean yourself off those chemicals, and you're gonna have to buy, a pouch of Golden Virginia Rolly and mix it in with your stuff, and then slowly but surely kind of wean yourself off, and eventually you'll just be, operating by yourself on your homegrown stuff. That's one way out that I can see. A lot of people have jumped on board and are doing this, and I think as a cigarette smoker, yeah, that's possibly the best option out there. I mean, I can tell you to quit, but will you? I mean, I tell my wife to quit, and will she? No, she won't. She's also on the autistic spectrum, on the high functioning end, what they used to call Asperger's. So for her, smoking a cigarette is a very comforting ritual as well. It allows her to get away from social setting if things get a bit overwhelming. And then she wants to kind of find an exit and just puffing a cigarette outside. It's soothing. So for her, she'll never ever stop smoking. I've made my peace with that. It's her choice, it's her lungs, but she doesn't smoke very heavily. Thank goodness. It could be a lot worse. So as a cigarette smoker, giving up is often not an option. It's very, very difficult. You have to absolutely want to stop before you can stop. And it's that wanting, because most cigarette smokers don't want to stop. They want to just continue and be left alone to do their thing. That's what it comes down to. Somebody spoke about nicotine gum, like how addictive is nicotine gum. And I'm going to tell you right now that nicotine gum is not addictive at all. The problem is with nicotine gum is that it releases nicotine quite slowly, and it releases it into the mouth. So you're chewing on your Nicorette, or whatever the gum is that you have. You're chewing on it, it releases nicotine, which makes its way to the brain, to the receptors. Unfortunately, it does, well, not unfortunately, but it does this a lot slower than what you would get out of a cigarette. So for someone who's trying to quit smoking cigarettes, chewing gum is often not the answer, which is why not a very large percentage of people who try gum actually quit. Firstly, you have to absolutely want to quit. That mental process has to be in place. Your mind needs to be made up. It's like, yes, I'm going to stop. Done. I have spoken. And then from there, you use the gum just to try and keep your cravings at bay. But it's nowhere near as satisfying as a cigarette. And obviously, the makers of the gum, they can't really make a quick releasing gum, because then you would get addicted to the gum. Then you're just swapping one addiction for another. So yeah, nicotine gum is not particularly, maybe someone will actually manage to get addicted to it if they try hard enough, but in general, because it's a slow release, same way that cigar nicotine is kind of slow release through the mouth lining, it's just not, it's not an effective way to get your dose of nicotine if you're a cigarette smoker and you're craving that head rush. Another thing I wanted to mention is the annoying message you see here and there, that cigars are not a safe alternative to cigarettes. They are a safe alternative to cigarettes if you are a non-smoker. So if you've never smoked anything in your life and you decide, you know what, I'm going to start smoking. If you're faced with a cigar on the one side and cigarettes on the other, then obviously go for the cigar. The cigar is safe as long as you do it responsibly. If, however, you are a cigarette smoker, all right, and you want to make a transition to cigars, believing that they are safer, that's where the tricky part comes in. You have now been trained all your life long to inhale your cigarette smoke. If you puff on a cigar, you will be tempted to do exactly the same. And what that health thing that I showed you on screen, that report has clearly shown that if you inhale your cigar smoke, you are just as bad off as you were before. So it is definitely, in that sense, it is not a safe alternative to cigarettes. And therefore that statement is then true. So it depends. It depends from what angle you look at it from. The pleasures of smoking has now been thoroughly tainted by the Flue-cure Tobacco, which took over the whole world, gave us the cigarette, got everyone who smoked it thoroughly addicted, and it's going to be interesting to see where this all ends up. I mean, the anti-tobacco movement is pretty strong. They're pushing very hard. So much evil has been done by those large tobacco corporations that have pushed cigarettes out to consumers. They've aimed them at children. They've aimed them at all members of the public. And the intent was to get as many people hooked as possible. Because if you have a repeat customer for your product, then you will forever be generating money. That was their play. They played it well. And so now we are sitting with the situation that we have. I'm hoping that cigars will carry on regardless. I wish people would get more education so they know that they know more about cigars, and the fact that if you are a non-smoker but you smoke cigars, you just enhance and enrich your life in so many ways. I mean, what a fantastic hobby, and what a fantastic product. Let's not forget that a cigar, a good premium cigar, has been handcrafted. It's been rolled by hand. There's quite a bit of science behind the rolling. It takes an enormous amount of skill to roll a cigar. So when you smoke a cigar, you don't do so lightly. You smoke a fabulous cigar with great respect. So you have the cigar industry on the one hand, which some of the big name brands are like families. It's family businesses that are handed down through the generations, so that skill and that knowledge never gets lost. That incredible skill involved, not just growing the tobacco, preparing it and fermenting it, but the rolling process, and the blending. I mean, there's just so much skill. Everything is done by hand. So that eventually, by the time that product comes into your hands, it is something special. And when you smoke it, it should be a celebration, a real treat. You take that and you compare that to the cigarette industry, where you just have low quality tobacco from all around the world, chucked into factories, chemicals get added, you have this expanded fake tobacco churned in there, you have millions of these little white sticks produced, and the filter on the end is also non-biodegradable. There's just nothing nice that you can say about cigarettes. Nothing nice. There's no skill involved. There's a bit of science as they tweak the ingredients for their recipe to get all of mankind enslaved. Do the right thing and grow your tobacco. That's about all I can say for you cigarette smokers out there. Yeah, maybe it's not a topic that cigarette smokers want to hear, but it'll be interesting to see where the tobacco industry goes and how badly the anti-tobacco movement, how far will they go? Will they eventually crush cigarettes and Flue-cure tobacco, and will cigars be taken down at the same time? So I'm going to end this video with a final thought, a final scenario. I saw this not long ago. It was just before I got infected with COVID. I was driving home from work, and there's a local school nearby, and there's some school kids. It's a junior school, so it's not, I don't think they're high school kids there. It's sort of, there's a school, there's a little shop nearby, and some of the boys had got some cigarettes there, and you can see the manner in which, he's just crossed, it's quite a busy road there, he's just crossed the road, he's got his buddy with him, and he's fiddling there in his school satchel, takes out his pack of cigarettes, and he's like, the way he lights it, that whole kind of vibe is giving off is look at me, I am the man, look at what a man I am, and he lights his cigarette with a flourish, and it's like and he's like talking to his buddy, and I was just thinking, shame. You're gonna shine for 5 minutes with your street cred, but where will you be in 10 years time, in 20 years time, in 30 years time? Because that's just gonna lead, cigarettes is gonna lead you down that black hole of addiction. And yeah, that's the path you've chosen. And that's another thing about these evil tobacco corporations, is when they aim at children make a stupid decision very early on in their life, and that's it. They stick for the rest of their life. That decision sticks with them. I'm not saying that cigar manufacturers should target children as well to give them better options. I'm saying that nobody should smoke anything until they get to their 20s and they can make a viable decision for themselves. That's how it should be. It should actually be, you should actually reach legal age, and it should be like a passage of manhood or something, where you then smoke a cigar on your 21st birthday or something like that. And then not everyone's gonna become a cigar smoker. It's not for everybody. So in an ideal world, no one would smoke cigarettes. There'd just be pipe, tobacco, cigars. End of story. So that's just my opinion. You're welcome to chuck your own opinion in the comments. I don't mind. Go for it. So thanks for watching. Once I'm back on my feet properly, I will get back to sorting out my kiln, and then we can carry on with the process that I've got going on here. So thank you for stopping by, and yeah, keep safe. I'll catch you guys in the next vid. Cheerio.